So we got that housekeeping. All righty. Looking at who's come in already, I think almost everybody knows Randy, but in case someone doesn't, his record at Wells goes back before mine. He started coming to Wells before I did, and actually had another Wells girlfriend. We won't talk about her. But then I showed up 50 years ago, and it went from there. He's been doing this genealogy thing for a long time. And as a result, I have been having to do this genealogy thing for a long time. Um, his idea of a romantic date involves my being in courthouse basements with boxes full of 100-year-old papers that no one's looked at.
I'll explain more about that in a moment.
It also involves my getting sunburned and bug bit in old cemeteries. And then my real favorite is getting a good case of eye strain from trying to decipher 18th century handwritten church documents from Pennsylvania churches that are all written in German. And did I mention I don't read German?
All right. Okay.
But
So,
anyway, he really knows how to show a girl a good time, and he'll show you a good time tonight too.
well, good evening. And my presentation is about my genealogy journey. And it's taken about 60 years, and I'm not sure I've arrived at my destination yet. So it's still a trip in progress. But it's been a journey of discovery about where my family came from because I had really no idea, nor did my living relatives at the time when I first started. So I hope you'll find it interesting, and I hope you maybe will even find it helpful if you're thinking about researching your own family tree and genealogy. Um, my relatives uh, made many travels as I have, but including, as you can see on this boat here, which is the Porsche. Shown sometime probably in the early 1920s is my best guess. My father told me that his uncle, Eddie, ran a speakeasy in Astoria, Long Island, in Queens the borough of New York City, during Prohibition. And I came to find out through my research that the Porsche, this boat shown here, was likely used to smuggle rum onto Long Island for Eddie's bar. But I also learned a lot more as we'll see. Well, starting at the start, my trip started one winter day in New Jersey, where my family lived just outside of New York City in the 1960s when I was about age 11, and some winter weather kept me stuck in the house. And looking for something to do, I picked up a copy of a Reader's Digest. And I read an article about genealogy, and I was immediately fascinated with the subject and started to research my family tree by interviewing my parents. Now, I've always been interested in history, but what I've come to realize is that all the history that you learn in school is macro history, and genealogy is, in effect, micro history. It's the history of individual people. And that can be very fascinating because everybody has got their own story. Now, in the 1960s, when I started, genealogy consisted mostly of asking your relatives what they remembered about their relatives, and you could draw a family tree like this one that I drew back in 1965 or so. Now, that'll only get you so far, though. Once you've talked to everyone older than you and still alive, uh, you're pretty much at a dead end. And the thing is, you've got a lot more dead ancestors than living ancestors. And I'm reminded of, I think it's an ad for Ancestry.com, where they're interviewing a lady and she says, uh, I'm interested in my ancestors. I know we have them, but I just don't know who they are. And that's a typical situation for a lot of us. Well, in talking to my father, the man pictured here on the left, and you may see the resemblance between me and him. Um, he had returned from serving in the Pacific during World War II, and by the time he returned from the war, both of his parents were dead. And so I never met them and knew very little about them. But my father did explain that his father, shown here on the right, had also served, but in World War One, and that during the war, uh, my grandfather, shown on the right here, John Jerome Kissell Sr., my father being John Jerome Kissell Jr., uh, that Senior's sisters, my father's aunts, had decided during the war to change the pronunciation of the family name. It had been pronounced Kissel, and they changed it to Kissell. And by moving the accent from the first syllable to the second syllable, they hoped that it would sound less German, and maybe even be passed off as French, which was a good thing during World War One. It might sound incredible today, but Germans in America were severely persecuted during World War One. In fact, a German was lynched in St. Louis for not being enthusiastic enough about the war effort, and the mob was acquitted of his murder because they had committed, quote, a patriotic murder. I even had some relatives that I later learned about who were Kissells living out in Portland, Oregon, who claimed that their name was really Van Kissell and that they were from Holland, so as to avoid association with Germany. Now, my mother had been given some pictures of my father's family, which she showed me, and this was the one that showed the entire family. And this is the whole family around 1921 in the living room of a house that Jack Kissell, my grandfather's father, or my great grandfather, had built around 1895 in Astoria, Long Island. Now, Jack's my great grandfather, and he's the stern fellow pictured in the middle of this picture here, with all of his sons, daughters, and some grandchildren circled around him. And even some of the people in the front row here, a niece or nephew from his sister who died very, very early from breast cancer. My mother was able to identify some of the people in this photograph, including my father, who is the baby sitting in the lap of his father on the far left of the picture. That's how I know this picture was taken in late 1921, because my uncle Ralph had not yet arrived on the picture. And I can tell that because my grandmother, who I also never met, is in the middle of the back row. And my mother speculated that she was put back there instead of close to her husband because she was pregnant in this picture. Now, my parents were less knowledgeable about this picture, which they had, and they said, well, it's very old. And I could tell that just by looking at it. And they said, we think these are some Kissells, or they would have said Kissells, but nobody knew who they were. And I thought they might be the guys on the Smith Brothers cough drop boxes rather than my relatives, but yeah, I had no way to know. And what was strange was Jack Kissell or Kissell lived in New York, and this picture was labeled Pittsburgh down in the bottom, and Pittsburgh without the H on the end. So my investigations had to stop at this point because my life got very busy. I was got into high school. I was running track and cross country after school, worked in a local grocery store, and ultimately went to college. And so I kind of forgot about genealogy. Oh, and here's the Smith Brothers cough drops, and you can see the resemblance there, I think. Well, after college, I married a Wells woman, as you've already heard, and we moved to Texas for some of my career moves. I'd forgotten about genealogy when one day in 1980, I got a thick package in the mail from a Bruce Kissell. And the envelope contained the Kissell family tree that his father, Fred Kissell, had created. And Fred was retired from the Army Corps of Engineers, had served in World War II also. He lived out in Pittsburgh, and he had taken up genealogy as a hobby after he retired. And he was the son of one of Jack Kissell's brothers, Roy Kissell. And he was born in Western Pennsylvania and had lived there all of his life. Well, Fred found some fascinating information, including information about the Kissells in a book that had been published in 1896. And back around that time, it was very common for who's who books to be published in every little county in America. And the publishers made money by getting people to subscribe to get their little family story, their name, and their relatives put in the book. This was a history of Westmoreland County, which is the county just east of Pittsburgh, where Ligonier is. And for a small fee, the publisher would include a short and usually typo-ridden biography of you and a little family history. And now, what Fred had done, which was great, was he had connected himself and to my surprise, me, to many living Kissells descended from this Edwin Ruthven Kissell and the other Kissells mentioned in this little piece. And Fred labeled Jack's family the New York Kissells because Jack, for reasons that I'll probably never know, had left Western Pennsylvania as a young man to make his fortune sometime in the 1880s and had gone to New York City, which was rather unusual because most people went west, but he went east. And he hadn't done too badly because, according to family lore, he became a plasterer contractor and worked on the Grand Central Station in New York City when it was revamped and changed around in 1910. Now, Fred's family tree went back a lot farther than my 1960s effort, and it traced the Kissells back to Kissell Springs in Westmoreland County of Pennsylvania. And it identified my great grandfather, Jack's father, so my great great grandfather, as Daniel Kissell, born in 1838, and it had Jack's siblings and the father of Daniel, William Kissell, born in 1809. Wow. I mean, this is really going back much further than I'd be able to do just by talking to living people. And Fred also included a picture of the Kissell Springs Hotel that Daniel had built near Ligonier in the late 1800s. Well, I had a rekindled interest now because there was new information out there, and so I hit the local library in Conroe, Texas. And that's how you did genealogy in the 1980s. I joined the local Genealogy Historical Society, which consisted mainly of a bunch of blue-haired Southern ladies and me. And I'll say that even though they really weren't sure what to do with me, they were very kind and very helpful, and it was very interesting working in that little library. They had a wonderful little genealogy section. Well, so I hit the stacks there, and I was absolutely amazed when I found Fred's William Kissell, a stonemason, in the 1850 census in Ligonier, Pennsylvania, right where Fred said he was, along with my great great grandfather Daniel, who was a boy of 12 in 1850. And I also found mention of Kissells and what looked to me to be pronounced as Kissell, going back to the 1700s, further east in Pennsylvania, in Lancaster County. But how they could possibly be related to William just wasn't in that Conroe, Texas library. And let you in on a little secret. Before 1850, if you're listed in the U.S. Census in the United States, that simply meant you were the head of a household, and only the heads of households were listed. So children, spouses who weren't the head of the household, just were little tick marks or numbers in certain age brackets. There'd be so many females under 16, they'd write three, but what their names might be or who they were just isn't available before 1850 in the census. Well, since Fran, my wife, lived in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, growing up, we would visit there periodically to go back and see her family. And on a trip in 1982, I visited the Bethlehem Library, and I found a lot of mentions of Kissells in the Moravian settlement in Lidditz, Pennsylvania, which is just north of Lancaster. about the center part of the state. And the Moravians had founded Bethlehem in 1741 and still lived there in buildings like the community house that's shown in this picture. Some beautiful architecture, and there were lots of references to the Moravians and some of the settlements that they founded, including the one in Lidditz. Well, Lidditz is about an hour or two drive southwest of Bethlehem, so Fran and I planned a trip there, and then on to western Pennsylvania and out to Ligonier. So we took off, drove down that way, and on the road just outside of Lidditz, we encountered a sign that said "Village of Kissell Hill." I had no way of knowing. I thought that Kissel Springs was way out in western Pennsylvania, so I had no idea what Kissell Hill was because we were far from Ligonier and the site of the old Kissel Springs Hotel. But I thought, well, this must tie in somehow. And it was very hard to recognize this area bordering the Lancaster County Airport for what it might have been back in the early 1700s, but it had once been farmland that was settled by the Pennsylvania Dutch. Now, the Pennsylvania Dutch were in fact mostly from modern day Western Germany along the Rhine River, and they typically traveled down that river to Rotterdam and boarded a ship to cross the Atlantic. And that might be why they were often referred to as Dutch, because they left from a port that was Dutch. Or possibly because when they were asked what people they were, they said Deutsch, which is German for German. But anyway, from Lancaster, we continued along US Route 30, very old highway, going out to western Pennsylvania to Ligonier. And little did I realize that this was the same route that my ancestors had followed. It's the old Philadelphia to Pittsburgh Road, which is also known as Forbes Road for the British general who built its western part in 1758 during the French and Indian War. But it extends now largely along a route that's similar to the Pennsylvania Turnpike in that area. Our trip took us through Chambersburg, which is the county seat of Franklin County, a couple of counties west of Lancaster. And there I made Fran sift through file cabinets of old deeds in the basement of the county courthouse, as she has well reminded you of the indignity of that. And what was great was there were lots of Kissel deeds there. Even though the Confederates had burned a good part of Chambersburg during the Civil War, when the residents wouldn't pay a $20,000 whatever extortion to save the town from burning, but the records had been placed in wagons and hauled off and saved, and so there were lots of good information about Kissells that had lived there also. But finally, we arrived in Ligonier, where I rewarded Fran for her patience by us staying in a historic bed and breakfast. She glosses over those parts, but there are some side benefits for her too. And this is a little map of Westmoreland County and some of the townships out there centered around Ligonier and little towns called Oak Grove and sort of on the central part of the map. The next morning, we headed out to where I thought the Kissel Springs Hotel might have been located, sort of just northeast of Ligonier. And just outside of town, we came upon the Green Mountain Cemetery, where I walked past some headstones. And sure enough, there was Daniel Kissel's headstone. We learned that Daniel had built the Kissel Springs Hotel nearby starting in 1877. And I was able to look at old microfilm of the Ligonier Echo, the local newspaper, where there were some ads and there were some articles about Daniel. And there was a quote that I found. Daniel is called a clever landlord whose cleverness invites you to return. Now, I'm not sure what that means, but I think it was a compliment. And there were pictures of the Kissel Springs Hotel, a favorite mountain resort. And it was amazing. Daniel had enlarged the building on the property until it could seat about 100 guests in the dining room. And there were, according to the paper, a score or more bedrooms. There were tennis and croquet courts and horseshoe pitches. And Mrs. Kissell achieved an enviable reputation for her waffles, and oft times the top of the great eight-hole wood-burning stove would be covered with waffle irons. Turtle soup was another specialty of the hostess of Kissel Springs and much in demand by hunters and fishermen. But unfortunately, I think Mrs. Kissel was worked to death because she died in 1899 of a heart attack, and at age 62, Daniel turned over the operations of the hotel to his second son, Edwin. Now, unfortunately, the hotel burned to the ground in 1915, and Daniel died a few years later in 1920 after living in town with his son Edwin. And when Daniel died in 1920, that was less than a year before my father was born, way back in Astoria in 1921. This article that was in the Ligonier Echo actually is kind of appropriate for this audience because it reminds me of the New York Times article that said Wells College destroyed when Maine burned down in 1888. The difference here, though, is that, unlike Maine, the Kissel Springs Hotel was never rebuilt. And so I think that event sort of erased that part of the family from the New York Kissells uh, memories and experiences, and never went back there. But at least I've been able to identify the guys in the cough drop picture as Edwin, who's standing here, and Daniel, who's seated. But I was still bothered by the fact that any possible connection between the Kissel Hill Kissells in eastern Pennsylvania and the Kissel Springs Hotel, Ligonier Kissells, is apparently lost to history because Fred hadn't been able to find it. I couldn't find it. And I was pretty much at a loss to make any kind of connection there and thought maybe there wasn't a connection. Well, life went on. We moved to North Carolina from Texas, and I started my own company, got really busy. And I finally retired in 2021. And one of the things I wanted to do when I retired was come back and try to solve this mystery. And so I was able to return to genealogy, and man, what a difference a few decades makes. I mean, it was incredible. Genealogy has gone online. And subscription services like Ancestry and Family Search and MyHeritage are out there, and they have digitized literally billions of records. And you can access them right from your bedroom, from your home office, wherever, and they're at your fingertips. And so this is the Ancestry family page that, or personal profile page, I guess they call it, that I created for Edwin, and was able to do a lot of interesting research from here. But in spite of all those records that Ancestry had, it wasn't until I went back to the Moravian archives in Bethlehem in 2022 that I was able to find the missing link connecting William to his ancestors, those Kissells who had joined the Moravians in Lidditz. This is the baptismal record for Wilhelm Kissell, written in German, and German script is notoriously hard to read, but I had it translated, and it says this 18, actually, the baptism was in 1809. He was actually born a year earlier in 1808, and it says, Wilhelm, little son of Friedrich Kissell, day laborer in Warwick Township, and Maria, née Meister. So now I not only had the name of this great great grandfather, but my great great grandmother, Maria Meister. And once I had connected William to his father, Frederick, who was born around 1785, I was able to connect that Frederick to his father, Frederick. Lots of Fredericks here, and that Fred Kissell, who lived out in Ligonier in Pennsylvania, must have been descended from them because he also had that family name. But I was able to connect it to a Frederick Kissell born in 1762 in Lidditz. And he had been a resident and a big landowner of the Kissel Hill farm near Lidditz. He was the last child of Nicholas Kissell, who had emigrated from Western Pennsylvania, from Western Germany to Pennsylvania in 1729 through the port of Philadelphia, with his father George, who was born in 1679 in Igelheim, Germany. And that Igelheim is shown as it looks here today It almost looks like that could be, 1700. Now, these Kissells were a part of a migration of people from the Palatinate, which is now part of Western Germany, and some were from Switzerland and some were from easternmost France. And they weren't allowed to leave, however, until they bought their freedom from the local noble. So they must have really wanted to leave bad because they had to cough up the money for that, and then they had to pay for passage for a boat to take them down the Rhine River, and then they had to pay passage from Amsterdam, typically, or Rotterdam, or one of the ports in the Netherlands, across the Atlantic. Now, my particular family, the Kissells, were passengers on the ship called the Allen, and it left Cowes, England, and oftentimes they would stop in England as their last stop before crossing the Atlantic, just across from the Netherlands. And they left on July 7, 1729, and arrived in Philadelphia 2 months later on September 11th. Now, that's quite a paper trail, and that's all very interesting. But what was equally interesting was that the biology, that is the DNA, actually backed this up. And with Ancestry and other companies, you've probably heard about 23andMe and their financial difficulties. But with those companies like Ancestry that'll analyze your DNA, they will analyze your 22 chromosomes of your 23, which are called your autosomal DNA. And the analysis will do two things. It will tell you where your ancestor lived about 500 years ago, and will also tell you what of your closer relatives, generally fourth cousins or closer, that have also had their DNA analyzed and is available at Ancestry, who they are and how close of a match they are to you. That they're called your matches. And so here are my ancestors' homelands. And what's very interesting about this is Ancestry can distinguish between where your mother's ancestors' homelands were and where your father's were. And I actually think that this is fairly accurate because my mother had always told me that her father was part Jewish. And sure enough, we show as I show on her side as being something like 1%, 1 to 2% Jewish. And what's really interesting is that my sister, who I think is in the audience here, had her DNA analyzed also at Ancestry. And even though we share enough DNA to positively prove that we are in fact siblings, not half siblings or anything like that, but full siblings, and we have exactly the same ancestors, we don't have the same ethnicity. And that's because we each get a different part of our DNA from our parents. Well, we get half from each of our parents, but the parts that we get from each one are different. And so, what's kind of interesting about this is I'm about twice as Irish as my sister, but she's more German than I am. And so, for whatever that's worth, and Ancestry will show you where those ancestral homelands are on a map like you see here. I also had my Y DNA analyzed, which is DNA that is passed from father to son. And it modifies or mutates much more slowly than autosomal DNA and is passed directly from father to son. And the autosomal gets very diluted each generation that you go back. And so theoretically, you can get your Y DNA analyzed if you're a male, and it can take you all the way back to Adam. And so that's in fact what family tree DNA shows you on the map when they give you the analysis of your DNA. It showed that the Kissells or whatever you want to call them came out of Africa millennial ago, many millennium ago, went through Central Asia, and then eventually wound up into Western Europe. And there was one late-breaking development that was just fascinating to me. But in late 2022, you'll recall that the Kissell Hill farm was near the Lancaster County Airport. Well, the county wanted to expand the airport and do some construction, but before they could, there was a pile of old rubble in one corner, not too far from the fence line, of the airport that needed to be cleared. And when they looked at it, there were some gopher holes in the ground, and people looking in there thought they saw what looked like headstones or tombstones. And a local graveyard preservation group, which call themselves Of Grave Concern, they came out to examine the site on the airport property. And the airport had been built back in WPA days, in the 1930s, on the site of the Meister farm. And that's Maria Meister's grandfather who owned the farm, who married Frederick Kissell. You might recall it. I mentioned that. My fourth great grandfather. He married the girl next door, or the farmer's daughter next door. And the old Meister family cemetery was where the Lancaster County Airport is now. Well, they unearthed this stone, and it's here with a full German inscription, but it was Johann Meister's, and he was Maria Meister's grandfather and my sixth great grandfather. Now, last year they went back to do some more excavations there in preparation for more airport construction, and they found human remains, and then everything came to a grinding halt. And that's where things are right now. They're thinking about uh, digging up the remains and the tombstones and bringing them to a nearby cemetery. And they've been consulting with me and a second cousin of mine as ancestors who have some say in what happens. Um, I'm kind of amazed that they could find me or that they care, but I'm pleased that they're going to try to preserve the stones and maybe provide some more family history. Well, I've learned a whole lot more than I can tell you about here, particularly in other lines from my family. And now I've got nearly 10,000 people in my ancestry family tree. But I've only talked about the Kissell line here. And as you can imagine, you've got a lot more ancestors than just your father's father, father, on down that line. In fact, each of us have 128 fifth great grandparents. And I was mentioning that I had gotten back to my sixth great grandparent, Johann Meister. And so there'd be 256 people like him in my family tree. So there's obviously a lot more to tell. But that's enough for one day, I think. And I appreciate your attention. And I'd be happy to take any questions. I will mention that if you're interested in doing any family tree research, I would suggest starting at the Family Search website, which is free. It's run by the Church of Latter-day Saints or the Mormons. They have a lot of records, but the only problem there is that if you find yourself or your ancestors, the family tree that's constructed there may or may not be correct. Of course, anything that you do may or may not be correct, but anyone can change the family tree. There's just a one world tree. There's just your ancestor only appears in one place on that tree. And if somebody decides to change it because they think he was not your ancestor, or vice versa, they put somebody in they think was your ancestor or wasn't, um, you'd have to change it back if you think that's wrong. And so there's these changes constantly occur, and you don't have full control over it. So when you subscribe to a service like Ancestry or MyHeritage, then you create your own tree. You can make it public, but you can be the only person that can edit it, and so you can control how it changes and how accurate it is and how diligent you want to be about it.
Randy, I have two questions.
Yes, Cindy.
First, what uh, company did you use for your DNA testing?
I used Ancestry for my autosomal DNA for the 22 non-sex chromosomes, and I used I think it's called Family Tree DNA for my Y chromosome testing. They also
Okay.
do female, the mitochondrial DNA.
Okay.
Uh, I found that to be very helpful. And once you've done it at one place like Ancestry, you can transfer it over to other websites like MyHeritage or GEDCOM or 23andMe or other places where other people may have registered their DNA, and you can see check for matches there. I've noticed that Ancestry, excuse me, has mostly um, American patrons, whereas MyHeritage is mostly Europeans or more European. But there are a lot of people who are in both databases.
Okay. My other question was, have you ever done anything with the website called Find a Grave?
Yes.
Okay.
Find a Grave is accessible through Ancestry, which is really kind of nice. And so you don't need to separately go to find a grave, although you can. But within the records that Ancestry gives you access to, find a grave is included.
Right. Yes, I knew that. I work separately with Find a Grave, and you may want to think about this. Because you can take, yes, you can access pictures of the grave and add them to your ancestry profile, but sometimes they aren't correct either. And what I've been doing every time I come home to Aurora is I go to the cemetery and take pictures, and then I upload them to Find a Grave, but I also I go across the board to Ancestry. And there are lots of people out there that are taking pictures of tombstones and putting them on Find a Grave. But as you said, they become the owner, so to speak, of that photo.
Yeah.
And for instance, I discovered one of my great great grandmother. Can you believe this? Her name was spelled wrong on her tombstone.
Whoops.
I could believe that.
Whoops.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so every time I try to correct it, they're like, no, no, this is what it says. And I'm like, but I know that's not correct. But
Right.
Find a Grave is very interesting. And you mentioned earlier about my book about my dad. In Find a Grave, I made what's called a virtual cemetery. And on my father's page, I found all over the country the other 13 men who were in the airplane with him
Ah,
and connected them in this virtual cemetery.
right.
So you can, and then you can just click and go to California and Minnesota and wherever. And that's another nice way to
Very nice.
connect.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah, I often see families connected too on Find a Grave. You see a list for the other Kissells or the other Meisters or whatever at that in that particular little cemetery.
yeah.
I've also found errors, as like you say, people who the name is wrong, and of course, on the tombstone it often has the birth date of a person. But the most reliable date is the death date because that happened shortly before they were buried there. But the birth may or may not be correct, and many people fudged their age and things like that. So
Well,
Yeah.
I also find that depending on how old the stone is, it's very difficult sometimes to determine the difference between a three, a five, and an eight.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's just another thing that I've learned, but sounds like you and Fran had a fabulous time in all the basements.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
She's here to tell you.
sometimes there were little sounds that weren't especially
Oh,
exciting. But Cindy, are the pictures that I see in on the Find a Grave site of Wells people,
yeah.
Zabriskis, Henry, I think, are those from you? Are you the person who posted those?
No, not necessarily. And you can,
Okay.
Yeah.
it should. sometimes it'll say over on the left-hand side, photo uploaded by or photo by.
Oh, okay. I'll have to take
And
a
they're
look for
names
that.
that I don't even recognize. They're like professional find a grave people.
Hunters.
Hunters, there you go. And yeah, although sometimes with ancestry too, if you make a case to that person, they can pass the ownership of that tree or of that picture to you, um, which I also find very interesting, especially when, as you noted, sometimes the name was spelled with two L's and sometimes with one, and then
Right.
it gets jumbled up. But
Yeah. 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 And sometimes if there's a report that your ancestor is buried in a certain cemetery, but there's no picture available of the grave marker,
right.
you can request a local volunteer to go and take a picture,
Oh, I
so
didn't
that
know
you
that.
yeah, yeah, that way you can see it for yourself. And of course, sometimes it takes a long time for a volunteer to do that. Sometimes they take a good picture, sometimes not so good, but at least you don't have to go to every cemetery that you want to see the tombstone for.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. What would you say was the most surprising thing you learned?
That my father's cousin had an illegitimate child.
Oh,
I got that from the DNA that I found that I had a second cousin that I thought I knew all my second cousins from the work I had done, and this woman just it made no sense, who she said her mother was, um and she was 84 years old when I spoke to her a couple of years ago. And I was able to send her a picture of her father that she had never had a picture of her father. And so that was, and she was it was heartwarming conversation. She was very happy to get it, and she was very gracious that she bore no ill will, even though her half siblings refused to acknowledge her as a member of the family. She was, uh, fine with that, and so that was really it was maybe not the most surprising, but certainly the most notable or heartwarming thing that I encountered.
I'm
yeah.
surprised you didn't
I
take
thought you were going to go with the speakeasy. You surprised me.
Oh, oh,
Oh,
some of the stuff his family was up to, that's mild in comparison. We found some interesting, not quite an axe murderer. What did he use? Some kind of a knife?
oh yeah, yeah. I in 1761, this wasn't my direct line, but one of my great uncles, he was murdered by his son-in-law, who chopped his head off. And the story was that his son-in-law was tired of him, bothering him, criticizing him. So, yeah, yeah. But
Wow.
Marty, you had a question.
Well, first of all, Randy, I want to commend you on your dogged research. It doesn't surprise me. You haven't said much about the bootleggers, but the description that was sent out prompted me to look into um, my grandfather's role during Prohibition, which I knew a little bit, and I haven't done very much. Um, but he was involved with Gandolfi and Company, an Italian uh, company based, which had connections with Milan, where they produce Fernet Branca, which is so-called a medicinal um, digestivo, something one would drink after a meal, and it has a 39% alcohol content.
Oh,
You're making me thirsty.
Gandolfi and company did very well during Prohibition. So
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
you never
Yes,
really.
my uncle, my father's uncle Eddie. I recently found an article where a policeman tried to shake him down, and he turned. Eddie went to the police himself. This is 1924. I don't know how. Maybe the guys he was paying for protection were separate from this guy trying to horn in on the racket or something. So they arrested the new extortionist.
There are a lot of bar people in your family. I'm serious. It seemed like quite a number of your guys at some point or another all worked owning a bar.
Well, and one thing I'll say is that you go back to the late 1800s and earlier, and maybe it's just my family, but I would say maybe 80% or more of the people were farmers or laborers. I mean, uh, there are no governors, there are no priests, there are no, important people in my family tree, and I think it's probably pretty typical. Most people just work their whole lives at manual work, and there were some shoemakers, some stonemasons, some carpenters, especially later in the 1800s. But by and large, people just did manual work, and that was it. So, and any other questions that I may have missed?
You're
Carol?
Carol,
I
you're
am.
muted.
Okay.
muted.
So I just have one comment, Randy, too. I'm interested in genealogy, and I am fortunate to have piles of photographs that go back generations. But interesting, among the photographs are two photographs that I've labeled the mystery ancestors. And they're a man and a woman, two separate portraits on 8.5 by 11 paper, good stock paper. These were clearly valued, these photographs, because they were large. There's no name on them. And there's probably no name on them because, well, everybody knew who they were. So, but now you go down several
Right.
generations and we don't know who they are. I've sent them around to my cousins to see if anybody can shed any light on it with no response. From the way they're dressed, I think it goes back to Civil War, just before Civil War. But I look at them from time, they're very stern-faced because in those days you had to stay very still to have your photograph taken. But I would love to know who they are. So my one advice to people is label your photographs because you'll put them away in a box
Well,
and
I
your grandchildren will look at them and say, "Now who is this?" But we
well,
go,
a couple of thoughts that might help you.
yep.
Ancestry, MyHeritage, they will date your photograph. If you submit it, they will suggest based on the quality of the photograph, the styles that the people were wearing,
Mhm.
other AI judged things, approximately the date of the photograph. And I understand, and they'll even tell you what percentage confidence they have within what number of years that they think the photograph is from.
Oh, interesting.
Um, and that can be very helpful. Also, Google Images. You can submit any image to Google Images, and if there's anywhere in the database that it has this a similar photograph or maybe the same people or the same site or whatever, it will conjure that up for you. Now, if it's my sixth cousin once removed and laborer in eastern Indiana, from 17 or 1882. They probably don't have a picture of him, but they might. And so you may do some good by checking out those types of ways. Um, and the other thing is to learn as much about your family as you can, and then you may by some just by happenstance or by default say, wait a minute, these people must be these people because of when the pictures taken and all the other people that it can't be and things like that.
Interesting. So, Randy, Google Images, but you mentioned something. Was it Ancestry?
Yes,
Ancestry.
Ancestry and
Okay.
MyHeritage, both. Those are two genealogy subscription uh, websites. And you don't have to pay to use Ancestry. It's just that if you want to use all of its search capabilities, then you do have to subscribe.
Hmm.
Um, but you submit the photograph and they will give you an approximate time that it was taken.
Oh, great. Thank you. MyHeritage and Ancestry and Google Images.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I
Are
just,
Sure.
you,
the
are
irony of
you,
it, these
I,
photographs were clearly valued because they were so carefully kept. And
Oh
now,
yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and, and now we don't know who they are. So thank you very much.
Sure. Sure.
Somebody wanted to say.
I use Ancestry all the time for some research I'm doing on artists and stuff. Um, and I have access to a subscription, but a local library often has access, so you don't have to you know pay
Yeah.
basically. So
Yeah. And Ancestry is always running discounts, like 50% discounts. So,
yeah, yeah.
you can get a 6 month subscription for pretty, maybe $10 a month or in that ballpark, which and it will also offer you access to all sorts of newspapers through newspapers.com, old newspapers that will have all sorts of articles and maybe a picture of your relatives even, that you can compare to from 1887 or whatever.
And doesn't Ancestry also kind of offer like family deals where if you take a subscription, you can put a certain number of relatives on and give them a subscription for free.
Yeah.
Oh, mhm.
So if you know of a relative who's already on, check and see if they'll put you on.
Yeah,
Okay.
they may be able to share with you.
Great. Thank you.
Well,
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 thank you all very much. If you have any questions about genealogy, feel free to email me. It's Randy Kissell76 at gmail.com. I probably should have put that up, and some of you probably already have my email.
And he uses the most modern spelling, two S's, two L's.
Yeah, but I'd be happy to try to help out. And I've done research on Paul Jones, the Paul Jones house in Aurora. I've done a lot of her genealogy and taken her back to the 1700s, and that's kind of interesting because she actually comes from steel industry royalty in her family, which I found fascinating. I say royalty maybe on a, duke level as opposed to kings like Frick or Carnegie, but that's where her family made their fortune, and I guess we're able to put her in Wells College in 1914 when she matriculated.
And we
Um,
found some good things because we found passenger lists she was listed on. So we knew when she had taken certain cruises with her family and travels. That was a fun thing to find out.
Yeah, if your ancestor was wealthy enough to get a passport, there's a just a huge amount of information, in a passport application, pictures of the person, birth dates, all sorts of stuff. Um, or if they naturalization papers, if they were a foreign national who wanted to become an American citizen. So
Randy, I just thought of another subscription website that I've used a lot. It's called Fold 3, FOLD, the number 3.com, and it's military records. And I pulled up relatives' actual draft registration cards, and
Mhm.
they can go back. I know they have World War One and Two and Korea and Vietnam and all of that. I'm not sure how far back they go, but depending on the state, the ones in New England, Massachusetts, and Connecticut have a little bit more of the Revolution records, muster rolls, that kind of thing. So that's
yeah.
another good place if somebody is looking.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you might have broken it up a little bit when you said the name of the website.
Fold,
Could you repeat?
FOLD,
Oh, Fold,
the
yes.
Yes, yes, okay.
the number
We've used
3
Fold.
dot
Yes,
com.
full3.com. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot, they are good for military records. They've got even more than Ancestry, but Ancestry will generally gives you access to draft records registrations for Civil War, World War One, World War Two, and now Korean War is just coming online. So, and those can be for males, huge amount of information.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well done. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Well,
Thanks,
Keep it up.
everybody. Our next
oh,
meeting
quick plug for next
um,
time. Yes.
is February 11th, just before Valentine's Day. And our speaker is Vicky Keller Panhouse from the 74 and sister of one of my dear classmates, the late Sarah Lee Keller. Um, Vicky has been, we're going to kind of continue with a family theme here because Vicky has just published a book where she did some studying about her aunt who was a missionary to China and Africa. And she's going to talk about the book talks about Aunt Mary's time in China between 1947 and 51.
Wow.
So we'll be looking forward to that, and hope we'll see everybody there. In the meantime, y'all stay warm and
Thank you.
enjoy yourselves.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you.
You take care. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.